Hello and welcome back to another episode of Garry's Garage, and in this episode we're going to be modifying this radiator to fit in the front of the Anglia. Last episode we finished off the engine mounts on the side of the body, replacing the single one at the front. That means it's freed up a lot of space for me to reposition this radiator, and in order to do that and make it fit, I just need to make a few minor alterations. So the inlet and the outlet both need moving, as does this drain plug, and we need to make up some mounts to support it, fix the fans properly, and something on the front to also hold a charge cooler radiator. So I think the first thing to do will be to start slicing the bits off that are definitely in the way, and then have a look at figuring out where to reposition them. There is a lot of play in this front, and it's always sat a little bit off. I was thinking about sorting the mounts and the hinges and the fitment of this flip front much later, but I think I might have to tackle it now, because getting this radiator in just the right place to clear the front, if I do it now with the front where it currently is and give it plenty of clearance, and then when I come to do the front I have to move it and I've not got clearance, and I'm going to have to redo all the radiator mountings again. So I think we're going to have a slight diversion. We're still mounting the radiator, but first off I think we're going to need to sort out this flip front, get it hinged properly, a bit stronger, get it lined up nicely down the car. There's always been a bit of a gap between the back edge of the flip front and the front edge of the door. And looking at the gap I've got on this front panel here, I think I can probably take up that gap at the back, take up this gap at the front, and just neaten it all up a little bit. And then that will give me the best positioning possible for this front panel and the radiator, and then I can finally get the radiator mounted. So, slight change of tactics for today then. Okay, so I've manhandled the front into roughly where I want it to go. It has taken up quite a lot of that gap at the back edge of the wing. The door can still move forward a fraction to even it out, I think, and it's just taped into place at the moment. It's all very precarious, and I think what I need to do now is try to figure out how I'm going to modify the hinge to make it fit. So I'm going to go and do some head scratching, and hopefully when I come back to you in a moment I will have a bit of a solution in mind that we can try. Okay, so fundamentally the hinges pretty much work. The problem is that now they're just slightly in the wrong position and they're still a little bit flimsy. So there's a little bit of left to right movement when it's bolted up here, and because it's only a single point going through the hinge, there's a little bit of up and down on this pin as well. So just a little bit of slop in it. And also because I've cut away part of this front panel to clear the radiator, I've lost a little bit of rigidity going across the front panel. That allows a little bit of flexing as well. And just generally with a large fiberglass panel like this, there's just not enough bracing on the underneath for it to hold its shape. So I think if I just modify these brackets slightly to realign them to where the hinges currently are, when I put this front piece back on at the bottom here, the cutout for the radiator, I can add in some more reinforcement, and then I can just add in a few little bits of reinforcement on the back of the front, just in a few key places, just to add a little bit more strength to it and stiffen it up and make it less flexible overall. The combination of all of those, I think, should then allow me to get it sitting a lot nicer, coming up and down, less wobble on it, and without totally redoing everything, because as I said, fundamentally it works, and it works reasonably well. It's just a bit wobbly and a little bit out of alignment. So what I'm going to do is make sure that doesn't wobble by adding an extra support onto the chassis down here. Now that I've removed this previous lower panel. I don't need to bolt through this way to get to it, so I can maybe put in a stud there to come out to, so I can still remove the bracket if I need to, but just stiffen that up. I think I will put another bit coming down on this side to pick up here, and that will then mean that the pin goes through both sides of the bracket, both sides of the hinge and the actual hinge itself. That should again stiffen it up a bit, and then yeah, when I get around to it, fiberglassing in some extra support on the back side of the panel, and that should be nice and stiff. So let's modify these brackets and try to not touch what's currently on the flip front, and see how that looks. Okay, that's those brackets just tacked into place and the pin's just loosely in. So what I'm going to do now, because I have to take basically remove the front in order to get the brackets off now, I'm going to take the tape off and just see if it pivots. If it does, all good, and then I can take it off, pull those brackets off and get them zapped up fully on the bench. So let's take some of this tape off and see how much it moves. There's still a lot of movement on that, but pins aren't in properly yet, and I still need to do all the reinforcement. Nope, that tack wasn't strong enough. Great. Oh, I hate this flip front sometimes. From the tacks I put on there, I can see where it needs to go, so I can zap it up. The problem is I cleaned off the wrong side. Ah dear. Right, so it's on its new hinges. It's still not quite sitting in the right position, but as I said, it still needs a lot of stiffening and maybe a couple of well-positioned rubber stops to hold it up in the right places and allow me to adjust it might be what's needed. Plus, obviously, I've got the locks down on either side to hold the wings in, and potentially I've got the option to add a lock back to the middle there as well to hold that bit in the right place. So a little bit of jiggery pokery, and it should be able to go in roughly the right place. But what I think I'll do is just work with it to sort of this kind of position for the radiator. It shouldn't hopefully droop anymore, but it should stiffen up a bit and go that way. So let's get back to having a look at how this radiator is going to fit in. So I'd originally planned on it being about here. It's probably a little bit too close at the bottom, so I might just have to either lift it slightly or angle the bottom out a bit more so that that bottom hose can go on in the right place. And obviously I've cut the inlet off here, so that will need to be moved 90 degrees to point downwards. And that should make hooking up the hose there a bit easier. So, but the main thing is, how much space have I got here to the bonnet? So I think I'm going to need to roughly hold that roughly in place there and see what I've got when I put the lid down. Right, with a little help, I was able to get underneath, hold this up in place so that this filler cap here is not touching the bonnet, then hold it still, get the bonnet opened and have a line drawn along on the cardboard. It was at a slight angle, so I'll just level it up, and then that should be where the top needs to sit, so I can then make up some brackets to hold it onto this front panel, and then I can look at spacing out the bottom to be just the right size so that, or position, so that I can get the lower rad hose on, and then I can make up all of the rest of the outlets and everything else that's needed. Okay, so that's the top brackets on. My TIG welding still is not brilliant, but they seem relatively strong and it will do for the moment. So next thing I need to do is look at doing the top outlet. That's going to come out, angle, down-ish to meet up with the existing hose. And then the bottom outlet needs to wriggle around this lower suspension, lower chassis bar. And this will need to space out just enough in order to clear that, but not too far, otherwise it's likely to hit the front panel again. So I've got some 32mm aluminium tube, so I can start chopping this up, ready to weld it onto here and weld it all together. Right, so after a couple of failed attempts at welding, some frustration, a burn just here as the bit of pipe moved and I went to grab it to stop it. Don't touch metal that you've just welded, it's bloody hot. But I have now a couple of angles welded onto this tube. So this one up here is going to be chopped off, you know, around here-ish, and this will go onto the top of the radiator, and that will bring the top hose down at a bit of an angle to meet up with the pipe that's already in the front of the car. And this bottom one will go about like that against the radiator there. At the very bottom, this will come up, miss the cross member that goes across to the lower suspension bolts onto, and then this will be chopped here for the hose to come round and loop into it. So I need to chop this down a bit and then look at welding these ends onto the radiator itself, and that's going to be the next fun task. Okay, so that's the top and bottom outlets now welded on. It certainly is not the prettiest TIG welding ever, but it looks like it is fairly watertight. Time will tell when I come around to actually pressure testing it. But before I do that, there is some more welding that might need doing, and that will be brackets on the bottom to hold it in the right place and also to hold the fans properly. So I think what I'll do is I'll bring it over to the car and let's offer it up for a test fit and see what we need to tweak next. I can get the hose on. I think I will need to blank out the drain, and then I can just make up a bracket that just brings it a fraction away from there, just so that's not hitting on this bottom corner, this one here. Right, just in the process of adding these bottom brackets. For some reason, when I've got the camera on, my welding goes to pot. And without the camera on, the welding is kind of okay. So that's why there's not going to be many shots of me welding this. I don't know what it is. That's just the way it seems to be today. So I will be back with you in a minute when I've finished zapping these brackets on, and then we should be able to get it mostly hooked up in the car. Right, so that's a radiator secured top and bottom, and that certainly is not going anywhere. While I was doing the bottom, I took the opportunity to add a couple more mounting bolts for this bottom cross member. I was planning on doing that anyway, now seemed as good a time as any to do it. So next thing to do is to trim down the top and bottom hoses and outlets to suit, so that I've got the best positioning for the hoses, so that the bottom one is clearing the crank and the top one is sort of, I suppose, high enough up that I can clamp it down without having to reach all the way down. And then I'm going to need to figure out mounting some fans. Right, so that's the top and bottom hose all sorted out. The top one just needed the angle cut off, the rubber hose, and then the tail I put on the top of the radiator was perfect. The bottom one, the hose didn't need touching, but the tail did need cutting back. So that's all good, it's all back bolted up again. So the next thing to look at are the fans. Now these are fairly slim, but they are still a good 5 centimetres or so thick, and there's not a huge amount of space behind the radiator. I don't really want to be putting them on the front because I've also got the charge cooler radiator to go on here. At the moment I've got that one from the Subaru Legacy, but longer term I might want to get something a little bit bigger because inlet air temperatures have always been a bit of a problem on this engine, just because of the packaging mostly. So I'm going to try to squeeze these fans back on the back of the radiator, but there's not a huge amount of room. There's arguments that will say that I should be making up a shroud to go on the back of the radiator to mount the fans to, or at least go round the fans so that only the fans are drawing air through the radiator. On a bigger, heavier car, then I would probably agree and say yes, I should be doing that. However, in the 4 years or so that I've had this radiator and these fans installed in the car, it has never once overheated. The car is so light and there's just so much power that when you put your foot down, the next thing you know is you're doing the speed that you want to be. The engine is almost never under heavy load for a long time. And heavy load for a long time is what puts heat into the engine and then subsequently into the cooling system. So at the moment I'm going to not make a shroud for the back. I may revisit that at a later date if I find that I start having performance issues with the cooling system. Maybe if I start doing some track sessions where it is under heavier load for a long time. But for the drag racing I've been doing so far, and also just general road usage, it's never been under enough load long enough to warrant needing the shroud on the fans. So I'm going to go without for the moment. I may revisit it. So let's try to get these fans squeezed down the back here and get them fitted up. Right, let's get all the mounts off first, give us the most space to work with, because I have a feeling this is going to be very tight. Right, this one is hard up against the alternator tensioner pulley. This one is hard up against pretty much everything, and the bottom brackets aren't touching the cross member. Now I do have a couple of millimeters of cardboard on, so maybe if I take the cardboard off the other side, that might just about give me enough clearance. I might also just need to space these bottom brackets out a fraction, although I would prefer not to because it is sitting rather nicely on these edges when it's sat back where I've put the mount. But we sometimes have to adapt to make things work. The first thing I think is to get that bit of cardboard out. Okay, so the radiator is roughly, or is in place, and the fans are roughly where they need to go. There is a couple of millimetres now between that pulley there and the casing of the fan, but down on this corner down here, it is going to be possible, I think, to shave the corner off of the fan. That's a mounting bracket or fix in place. I think I can shave that off, which will shift the fan across by a few millimetres, which will just open up that gap there. And then on the other one, get a bit more light. So you can see that's kind of in there as well, and I think if I can join that up with the other one along that join there, then that will hopefully do the trick. And it is just clearing, so I think what I need to do first is clearance that bottom corner on this fan and get that one mounted up roughly where it needs to go, and then, or lined up roughly where it needs to go. And yeah, this is just going to be in and out a few times, trying to gain just that odd millimetre here and there. So I'll be back when I've done something a little bit more useful. Right, so just about managed to get a pen in and draw around the top of this fan. So I've now taken it out and it's laid out just where it needs to be. It does sit over the bottom tank just a fraction, but I'm not concerned about that. Yes, there is potentially the chance for a small leak of air around the side of the fan, but it's minuscule in the grand scheme of things, and I can always put a little bit of foam or something in this gap just to fill it in. So what I need to do now is add the mounts and brackets and just get everything zapped on and nice and solid, and link these two together in the middle here. So I will go away and do that. I don't know if my jinx with the camera being on me when I'm welding will carry over to today, but I don't really want to risk it, so I'll just skip filming the welding for the moment, and by the time I'm back, hopefully these should be securely mounted. Right, so we have the fans now attached. There's a bracket over on each side here, and then one at the bottom, and I've linked the two together. I was able to put a little 6mm bolt with a nut in these, and that holds it together quite nicely. And although there's nothing holding it at the top at the moment, it's not really moving very far. So for the moment, I'm going to see if I can get away without a bracket at the top, but if need be, I can always make something up and bolt it onto one of these. So let's get this in the car, and hopefully it still clears everything. Okay, so it's in. The camera doesn't really pick it up, but there is about 8mm or so gap between that belt and the back of the fan. And down on the passenger side, and that's looking pretty good. There's plenty of clearance there to everything. So as you've seen, there is some clearance there, not a huge amount, but clearance is clearance. So next I'm going to quickly do is fire up the fans and just make sure they don't move about or vibrate too much, and that I've still got a bit of airflow going through here. Now they don't come on just on or off. The original VR4 had a variable fan controller, and that was controlled by the ECU. I've retained that, so I can ramp the fan speed up and down, and actually I have the fans running almost all the time at, say 30-35% anyway, just to keep some air flowing across the radiator, and most importantly the charge cooler radiator, so that that doesn't get heat soaked, and I've then always got some nice cool air and cool water in the charge cooler. So it's quite uncommon that they'll come on full speed anyway, but let's just give it a try with them on at full speed and make sure that everything's happy where it should they need to come on at full speed. So let's hook up ground and 12 volt, and here we go. Okay, there's just a very small vibration coming from, it's actually coming from the back of the actual hub on this. It's nothing, I don't think it's anything to do with how it's mounted. I think there's just a little bit of vibration in that anyway. That's only as it comes on and tries to give it full power. But as I'll be ramping it up slowly and back down again anyway, I don't think that'll be a problem. So I'm going to call that radiator and fans mostly a success. Obviously I still need to pressure test it, but I might need to weld some brackets on this to hold the charge cooler radiator. So until I've done all of the welding, I'm not going to pressure test it. So join me next time on Garry's Garage when we'll get the charge cooler radiator mounted, get this radiator pressure tested, and then hopefully that's all of the cooling side of the system done. Thank you very much for watching. Oh, and Happy New Year. Bye.